So once you understand that, and you've got that mechanism in all your joints, but the shoulder joint, it's really, really important, and probably the wrist joint, it's important as well, is that any imbalance of that leaves anything that it's attached to asymmetrical. So when a bone's not in its right symmetry and it glides, so you've got a simple joint like the hinge part of the elbow, you've got a convex part and a concave part, and so they sit together and they move through that range of motion lovely. If it doesn't move through that range of motion nicely, and there's no bony outgrowth, there's no trophic change to the joint, then the only thing that can be stopping it is muscles pulling out of alignment, and muscles can't pull out of alignment and maintain misalignment without ligaments misaligning themselves. So now you've got some of the line of force inside that joint pulling incorrectly. And so if you go to the hierarchy of it, the elbow, the ligaments are the hierarchy. So if I can feel around the ligaments and palpate and know that that's stiff, and know that when I look at the joint, that part of it's supposed to rotate internally, externally, that part's supposed to be the hinge, so the hand might pronate to there and then it won't come up to here, then I know that that point of the joint, those ligaments are holding it too tight, in approximation, can't move through its range. And what you'll find is I'd work muscles first, I'd work ligaments first, testing muscles afterwards, because muscles are ruled by the ligament position. So that's the rule of thumb that I would use.
I think we're done.
Yeah.
Can I
yeah.
add something in there? And I'm gonna send you all an article of a lady who I've been following, because you could get shoulder problems in from perimenopausal and menopausal women. And what happens in that timeline for them is that the estrogen actually starts to deplete out of the body, which can cause frozen shoulders. So I'm going to send you this document that this lady's published. She's actually an orthopedic surgeon in America, but she's also big on menopause. I've been following her for a couple of months. And this article talks about the adipose tissue, which is your fat and your muscle mass, but also estrogen, because of what it does and the way it depletes in our bodies after that time, is that it can actually make the ligaments in the shoulder frozen. And even though it can be that, you're still going to use the same things as what we're showing you, because even she's recommending you keep it moving. A frozen shoulder, you've got to keep it moving. But just, I'll send you the article. It's really interesting to read for any of you. Pass it on, because it is a really, really interesting read. And I can see you talking about the orthopedic test there. We were going to do the Addison sign, but I've just researched it there, and then it's not a recommended orthopedic test anymore. They don't validate it anymore for thoracic. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you all this document on all the orthopedic tests in the shoulder. Just so that you're aware of that if somebody comes in or they go to an orthopedic somewhere, the hospital may do them, only you don't do many of them, but you recognise them. That's all it's for. You don't have to use them.
They don't use them much anyway.
They don't use them, but just so that you're aware of what they are, just a bit more information. We used to use them, but you realise even like we have one called an empty cam test. You can't. The people can't even get their arms into that position.
It's rather like a PMC test. If
Yeah,
you've got a torn rotator cuff and you put pressure on the arm, they're in agony. So I look at that and I go, I'm not going to subject you to that. So if I was putting you into a position, which was what I covered earlier, if I was doing any muscle position and you can't put your hand into a PMC test, I assume it's weak. I'm not going to put a load of pressure on there and make it worse. And so as you're moving the arm through the different articulations, you can see that you've got a deltoid, you've got an infraspinatus, you've got a subscapularis, you've got a teres minor, you've got an anterior deltoid, you've got a supraspinatus, you've got a latissimus dorsi.
I think we should do a muscle dance when we come in the class.
You've got a rhomboid. And so any of those positions that when you go to articulate into the position to do the muscle test, if they can't go there, then you realise you've got a restriction to that. In other words, the humeral head can't rotate inwardly. Now, if it can't rotate inwardly to say, get me to an infraspinatus test, then I'm not going to be able to rotate it internally to get my hand behind my back. So that's going to be one of the restrictions it's going to have. So that takes you locally to the joint, locally to the muscle, where again, you can start to inhibit and palpate and work around all these different articulations. Because shoulder problems can be big problems to a lot of people. But if you understand the mechanics, there'll not be problems.
I don't know whether you have or have you demonstrated the first and second rib, how to go front and back of that?
No, not very. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So I'm going to put Paul back on the couch, and we're going to evaluate the first and second rib. And what are these called? Mobilization checks.
There's actually one in your book where you do and where you get. And I thought I'd asked a question on it, but I haven't. When you book, Debbie, it's where you take the shoulder forward and it should move in, and then take it back and it should move up.
Yeah. Just I find that if someone's got a real problem on the shoulder, if you've got a locked first rib, it doesn't matter what you do with the
So what Chris is saying there is, if he's working on someone's shoulder and they've got a locked first rib, you're not going to get very far at all. But also remember, the first rib restricts itself because of a fossa. So again, it can still exist afterwards, because any adaptation can become its own problem. So you clear away the pathway that caused it to go into adaptation. Doesn't always necessarily mean that the falling domino effect is going to clear the adaptations. So you're left with a separate problem because you've strained it while it's in adaptation. Does that make sense? So this is a way of evaluating: is the clavicle moving properly? Is the first rib moving properly? And is the second rib moving properly? And so I'm going to put Paul on the couch and show you that evaluation. Sorry, sitting facing away from you. So what we're doing is we're coming onto the sternal joint here. So I'm on the clavicle right here. The first rib is directly underneath that. And so I'm going onto the joint, onto the right-hand side of the manubrium. And then I'm taking the shoulder and I'm pulling the shoulder back, and the clavicle should go forward. And then I'm pushing the shoulder forward and the clavicle should go back. So either of those are telling me about the anterior or the posterior ligament holding that. So I'm pushing forward, it moves back. I'm pulling back, it moves forward, so that's okay. So then I go the next rib down, which is rib 2, and I'm pushing forward, it goes back. I'm pulling backwards, it goes forward. So that's the rib evaluation. You could also press into the first rib, so say, which is quite acute. So I'm pressing at the first rib here, and the second rib is a little bit further out, and you can actually put a compression test on and see if it's good. If it's stuck, it won't compress. So you go to compress it, and you get a weakness, and there's no weakness there.
And that would be classed as thoracic outlet syndrome.
Thoracic outlet syndrome, and that's where again we're coming to the subclavius, the first rib, the scalenes, and then the inhibition of that. And so if you can't turn the head away from, they could be all tight, and that's where we take a little finger out and put the coracoid process, which just relaxes that ligament there in the bicep, and then we can turn the head, so that frees off that. Also, just behind the collarbone there, you've got the pleural dome ligaments, of which there's 3. So you've got the transverse pleural, the costopleural, and the pleurovertebral ligaments. And those 3 ligaments we'll cover a little bit more when we go towards organs and things, but they're suspensory to the lung. So again, they can have restriction to do with visceral of the lung, and therefore visceral of the causing shoulder problems. But pretty much the technique that frees those off as well. It's just there are tests you can do to see if it was any one of those 3. What I found is this inhibitor takes all of them out, so I tend not to use that too much unless I'm assessing a lung position. Okay. Anything else?
I think that's it, John.
Any questions? Because I'm struggling to show anything new. I've covered everything that I possibly think I can to do with shoulders that I wanted to show.
Again, I was not to do with shoulders. I've got a woman that's kind of like the double jointed, very mobile, and her joints get quite sore. Is there anything you can do for that? Like hypermobility?
Yeah, it tends to be some people are born with the tension, laxity and the tension of the ligaments.
Syndrome as well, isn't it?
So there is a syndrome. So they're very flexible, but they get problems. Yeah. As to whether you can tighten those up, not really. If it's a syndrome.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
And I've got one other client that the hospital hasn't said he's broke his toe, sort of thing. But says he walks on it and it goes to bend like back like up the way. It clicks now after he's been hit by a shinty stick. But
What was the last bit?
Hit by a shinty stick. He was playing shinty, so a wooden stick's hit his foot.
What's shinty?
Imagine hockey, easier. That's what it's put up here. Imagine it's a hockey stick hit his foot.
Right, right.
It's went purple, but he no walks on it, and it clicks every time he walks on the pressure when he comes back up the way.
Right. Again, just the best you can do is work locally and just see how much you can actually rebalance those ligaments.
Right. Do you think it could be the ligaments clicking, or do you think it could be, obviously they said it's not broken, but is it more likely the ligaments clicking, or could it be the bone being out of place? He says it's not sore right enough.
Yeah. But if the ligaments are pulling, the joints are put in the right position, so it won't transmit to its normal range. So it's not the bone in and of itself; it's the bone's position in relationship to its joint play.
You
Right.
said before about pressing it out down, didn't you? You know, like the actual place of where.
Yeah.
Because the.
So say you've got a bone there, and you've got a bone there. So this could be the metatarsal, this could be the phalange. So each of those joints is its own separate synovial joint, and you've got ligaments at each of those points, and also the envelope around the joint itself, making the little basal sac.
Yeah.
So any of that tissue can have nociception in there that's shortened. And so what I would do is go very locally and literally feel all the way around. I feel for anything really, really tiny. Because nociception is interference going to the nervous system. So this is your toe, there's your spine. That interference is going to the spine. It'll trip out the spine at whatever level it's going to. So that depends on your dermatomes, which nerves feed in which area. And then it goes up to the brain. Now, if you don't get rid of this nociception, then they'll keep firing at that rate. Now, what's good about inhibition with pressure is pressure changes the chemical response across the synapse, and it changes the mechanical response across the synapse. So you've got your normal joint. So there's your normal joint, and there's your signals coming in. So those signals only go as a sensory response to the nerve, and a motor response always reacts to a sensory input. You get that? So the nervous system is at rest, and as soon as it gets a sensory input, then it produces a motor response. So as we change the weight ratio on our feet, that's a sensory input that produces a motor response. Now, what happens then is the nerve impulse has to be strong enough to produce movement in a muscle or activate the ligaments in the tourniquet. So it's got to be strong enough. So we call that neurobiotaxis. So there's the nerve coming along. You've got try and describe this a different way.